Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, To Restrict or Not to Restrict, that is the question. My name is Jenny Gra. I'm the training coordinator for ICPN, and I will be moderating today's webinar for you. Before we go ahead and then get started, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items so that you know how to participate in today's webinar. In regards to the Zoom commands, so we've turned off your cameras and muted your mics. So please use the chat box feature to respond to the presenter, to ask questions or share your experiences. If you do pull up the chat box, there's a drop-down menu, so please be sure to select all attendees and panelists. So this way that we can view one another's comments. If this isn't selected, you'll only be able to see my responses and not the other attendees. I will be moderating the chat box along with the presenters just to make sure that everybody's questions are being addressed as well. In regards to continuing education, we are only able to provide continuing education certificates for BCBAs and BCABAs for this workshop. So all BCBAs and BCABAs will need to complete an evaluation form in order to receive their certificate. I will be emailing the evaluation form following the completion of the workshop. So only the BCBAs and BCABAs need to go ahead and then complete this and then return the form back to me in order to get their certificate. If you do have questions about the CEs or the certificates, I will go ahead and then put my email in the chat box so you guys can feel free to reach out to me that way. And I did want to let everybody know that we are in the process of posting new workshops. So if you have not already, please visit us online at icpn.com. Our Facebook page to go ahead and view and register for future trainings. And then lastly, I did want to mention that there will be a survey following the end of this webinar. So please feel free to go ahead and fill that out, provide us your feedback. If you have any ideas or requests for future topics, that would be great as well. Now, without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and then hand it over to our presenters, Allison and Lisa, for you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Jenny. I appreciate that. So my name is Allison Chamberlain. I am a BCBA and I work for Illinois Crisis Prevention Network, the support services team. And our co-presenter today is Lisa Hunsberger, and she's also a BCBA with the Illinois Crisis Prevention Network Support Services team. So before we get started, we are going to be doing an interactive polling activity throughout our presentation. The instructions to join are on this slide. They should also be on all of the other polling slides. So I just want to give everybody a couple minutes to get registered. The easiest way, I believe, is to use your phone and text in your answers. So to join, you would text, so you would create a new text message, and in the to part, like who you're texting, you're going to put 22333. And then in the message portion of your text, so where you want to say your words in the message, you're going to put the Anna Vivanti 458 and then press send. And that will have you join in the presentation so that you can be able to participate in the polls throughout the presentation. So participating in the polls throughout the presentation is not mandatory. It's not something that you have to do in order to receive your CEUs or anything like that. But we do ask that if you can participate, that you do, and makes the presentation more interactive. And we also get feedback from all of you and your experiences practicing. So I want to give everybody a minute or two to do that. The other way that you want is if you want to respond on the internet, if you go to pollev.com/Anna Vivanti 458, and you can join the poll there as well. Let's see here. I was just checking the chat to make sure there wasn't anything about joining. And let's see here. I just want to give everyone a minute or two to join. And like I said in the slides, so I'm going to go ahead and click to the first slide just to go ahead and show everybody. Let's see here. So at the top of the polling there, there's the instructions as well. So each subsequent slide will also have the opportunity for you to join if you missed it on the first one. So the first thing I kind of want to just ask everybody is, when you guys think of rights restrictions, what is the first thought that comes to your mind? And this is kind of like a word cloud scenario where everyone kind of gives a word that they're thinking of. The more times that a word is submitted, the bigger it's going to get. And just so you know, if you're submitting answers and it's more than one word, it's going to kind of separate on this one. So when you think of it, what's the first word that comes to your mind? And this is anonymous, so you guys can be completely honest with us. So we've got community, limited access, limitations, limits, right? So definitely things that limits people access to the community, to different activities. All right. Sad. Oh,
I like how
yeah.
someone put sad. Yeah, it can be sad.
Okay, so thank you everybody for kind of sharing that. And I know, you know, when I first started this presentation with Lisa, and I kind of, you know, would come up with my answers, or I would go through and practice the polling thing. You know, some of the words that I thought of myself were a little bit on the negative side, and thinking of, like, you know, it's difficult or it's restrictive, obviously. And I think the purpose of today is to kind of discuss restrictions, you know, when restrictions should be imposed, things that should be done first, and to have an open communication about restrictions, and not have this black and white discussion of, you know, this is a restriction, this isn't a restriction, this should be done, this shouldn't be done, because every situation that you guys encounter is going to be different with every single person. And there's going to be a lot of gray area when it comes to restrictions. And I think that, you know, some of the fear or hesitation surrounding restrictions comes from that, and that it is not a black and white, you know, this is the protocol for it. You know, it's very individualized. And there's a lot of procedures that need to be followed beforehand to make sure that things are done correctly. So I know today's really geared towards BCBAs, but I just kind of want to poll and see, you know, what do we have up here today? Who's attending? Is there anybody other than, you know, BCBAs? We've done this for a previous presentation for a more general audience, and we had, you know, different professions, which is kind of interesting whenever you're discussing restrictions, because, you know, everybody has their you know, ethics code to follow, and also different professions have different, I guess, a hand in restrictions in a different way. So it actually looks like we do have a little bit of a mix today. That's nice. We've got some behavior analysts, BCBAs, BCABAs. We've got some QIDPs. Usually the QIDPs rule this presentation. They were the dominant force. And then it looks like we might have some LCSW, psychologists, or counselors in the house. All right. No representatives for the ISSAs. Looks like we don't even have one. Wow.
No ISSAs, but we also have an administrator
Okay,
on
nice.
here as well.
Good. I think that makes for a really good presentation, because then we get feedback from different professions and different point of views throughout the restrictions process.
You
we
forced
have an
your
ISSA,
ISSA to
pass.
speak up. Yeah, good job.
Very nice. Okay, thank you everybody for participating. Let's see here. Okay, so when you think of your confidence with right restrictions, where are you? Again, we don't know what you answer, so it's okay to be completely honest here. Rights restrictions is definitely a tricky area. There's a lot of knowledge base that, you know, needs to come with it. And it can be a difficult thing to confidently implement with your clients. So we're kind of hanging out in that middle range, right? And that is, you know, we've got some people who have a really strong grip with it. But I would say that's pretty typical, that most people are kind of hanging out in the average of, like, you know what, This is something that I do deal with, with my clients, but it definitely can be a little overwhelming. And there's a lot of knowledge base to kind of cover it. And that's something that we're going to kind of go over today is, what are some of the ground rules for restrictions? What are some of the protocols, and what are some of the things that need to be done beforehand? All right, thank you guys for your honesty on that. Anybody here ever served on a behavior management committee or human rights committee? Okay, we've got a large proportion of the audience today, huh?
It will be interesting as we go through this, and if some of you are still serving on this behavior management or human rights committee, if you've gained any knowledge that you think would change your view on your role in that committee. So that's exciting. So before we get started, I thought we needed to talk about, when we talk about restriction, what really are we meaning? What we're looking at is, does it prevent or hinder the enjoyment of general liberties that are available to all citizens? So basically, are people allowed to do the things and live the life that they want to live and act as they please? And so this is a little bit different than a privilege, right? Because when we think of a privilege, we're thinking of a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available to only our particular person or group. So one privilege would be in our country is to drive, right? You have to pass a driver's test. And only those people who possess driver's license can drive. So even if it's imposed, if the restriction is imposed for the protection of the person and the environment, these limitations should only be used after exhausting non-restrictive and positive supports. Every available option should be considered before choosing one that restricts a person's right in any way. And one of the reasons that I kind of want to bring forward is, if we are restricting somebody from engaging in a certain behavior, we're also kind of taking away that consequence for them to learn from that behavior. And so we kind of take away their ability to learn in those natural environments. So, all right, so we're going to look at, how did we get here? The first case is Wyatt versus Stickney in 1970, which recognized that people with intellectual disabilities are citizens who have rights under the Constitution. And this resulted in the development of 49 principles of service, which include the requirement to establish a 7-person human rights committee to review all habilitation plans and to ensure people's rights are preserved. This is from the residential core training module. So the habilitation plans, the names are a little bit dated of what they call it, because we keep progressing and changing as a field. There is also Olmstead versus LC and EW under the Americans Disabilities Act, which requires states to eliminate unnecessary segregation of people with disabilities and ensure that they receive services in most integrated setting appropriate to their needs. And I believe there are still 38 states who do have integrated segregated settings. Illinois, we know, is one of them with our SODCs. And then we have Legis versus Hamos, which was filed on behalf of people in the ICFDD facilities who want to move to community-based services and settings. We all know the people who are under the Legis consent decree, which involves, among other things, the provision of services to these individuals with developmental disabilities in the most integrated setting appropriate to their needs. The Illinois Department of Human Services does have a mission statement, and they basically provide leadership for the effective management of the design and delivery of outcome-based, person-centered services and supports for individuals who have developmental disabilities. These services and supports will be appropriate to their needs, gifts, talents, strengths, and accessible, life-spanning, and based on informed choice. And it's going to be monitored to ensure individual progress, quality of life, and safety. And then there are some HRC memberships should include at least 5 members, one of the person from somebody receiving services at the agency, and or his or family member or guardian. And at least 1/3 of the members should be unassociated with the agency. All right, so here I just want to kind of find out what are some common restrictions that you see with the people that you serve? And again, if it's 2 words, it will separate it so you can kind of string it all together in one word. Sharps, money, internet, good. I wonder if that's phone access, chemicals, locks, food, psychotropics, yeah. All right, media, social internet, let's see. Oh, iPad, combustibles, okay. Oh, good. Yeah, something with time in there. A 1-to-1. All right. And family. Oh, if somebody obviously has behaviors when they come back from their family or gets exploited by their family. Sexuality and kids. Okay, good. And what are some uncommon restrictions that you've seen? Anyone see anything that's just kind of like, wow? Fluids, video monitoring, sex towels, mail. Yeah, and clothes, paper clips. Okay. Bottles. Yeah, all right. A lot of food is showing up there. Oh, and caffeine and mitts, videos. Okay. Good. All right. Who on the interdisciplinary team do you all feel is most likely to impose a restriction? I think QIDPs have always led on this, and guardians as well. Okay. Okay. So everyone here feels the QIDPs. I don't know what's with the QIDPs. Okay, good. All right, even when the QIDPs were the majority of the present or the audience, they also felt it was them as well. So rights are protected by the Department of Human Services, Medicaid, Home and Community-Based Waiver. And everybody here has all these rights that are listed, but they also have the right to a least restrictive environment. So they have a right to services consistent with their needs, and they cannot be limited simply due to the availability of services. So when I'm talking about least restrictive environment, and then we go into, which we do have a big population in the state operated developmental centers. You can see that that's actually a more restrictive environment. And for the BCBAs, there's something that Timothy Vollmer says about that, and I will touch on that a bit later. So just kind of keep that in mind. They shall not be denied or suspended or terminated from services or have their services reduced for exercising any of their rights. And they also have the right to appeal and submit grievances to the agency and other service providers. So. All right, so where are you most likely to see restrictions noted? In what document? Yeah, that's why I'm kind of surprised that the QIDPs always get the high marks, because I do feel like it's always in the behavior plan, right? Or if they have a restriction, a lot of times that's used as justification that they need a behavior plan. All right, and I do see some in the person-centered plan as well, right? Because sometimes the person-centered plan does contain a behavior plan within that document. Okay. Yeah, so behavior plan wins. Okay, so because we most likely see it in the behavior plan, and I just kind of wanted to talk about and educate everybody what guides these BCBAs, BCABAs, and even other professionals within the field of applied behavior analysis, what guides us on our ethical decision of how we write in these restrictions. So we are kind of fortunate in the Illinois developmental disability system that it's based in applied behavior analysis. And the Association for Professional Behavior Analysts, which is APBA, has a position statement on the use of, and I'm going to the big one here, has a position statement on the use of restraint and seclusion as interventions for dangerous and destructive behaviors, supporting research and practice guidelines. So as a BCBA, I am ethically required to only put in interventions under my BCBA credentials that are research-based and empirical and shows some kind of empirical evidence. So applied behavior and analysis, we're focusing on new skills, providing access to preferred activities and items. So we're kind of looking for enrichment and access to this enrichment, and how can we get them to these natural reinforcers. Also choice-making opportunities, increasing appropriate communication, and making complex situations more predictable, and as well as reducing maladaptive behaviors. A lot of times behavior plans are solely focused on reducing maladaptive behaviors, and with the hope that if we are taking data on these maladaptive behaviors, that we will see if they are reducing, then we're going to assume that the plan is working, and hopefully even part of that plan is part of replacement skills or some kind of skill development. In the Association for Professional Behavior Analysts, the use of restraint and seclusion as interventions for dangerous and destructive behaviors. The statement says, it is APBA's position that restraint and seclusion procedures should never be implemented in isolation, but should only be used as components of properly designed and approved behavior intervention plans that emphasize state-of-the-art strategies for reinforcing adaptive skills and preventing problem behavior. So basically what they're saying is this should be implemented by trained people and supervised by behavior analysts with experience in treating dangerous behavior. It's not saying that restraint should not occur, but it is saying that if it is recurring and occurring regularly, that it needs to be part of a plan, and it needs to be closely supervised by a behavior analyst. And hopefully that behavior analyst does have some experience in working with problem behaviors so that we can see that reduction and know if that intervention is working. So in addition to the Association for Professional Behavior Analysts, we also have the Association for Behavior Analysts International. And basically, this is Vollmer et al. On page 106, they say consideration of emergency restraint should involve weighing the relative benefits and limitations of using these procedures against the risk associated with not using them. And then it says associated risk of failure to use appropriate restraint when necessary include increased risk of injury, excessive use of medication, expulsion from school, placement in a more restrictive environment, such as our SODCs, a less normalized setting, and increased involvement of law enforcement. So our association is not saying that you should not use these, but there's only certain circumstances. And if it's going to put them in a less normalized environment, or it's a risk benefit kind of thing on those situations. Now, I will say that ABAI is opposed to seclusion with its operationally defined as placing someone in a locked room. So they do not agree with placing someone in a locked room, which is often combined with the use of mechanical restraint or sedation. And if it's not part of a formal behavior intervention plan, which the individual being served or guardian has consented. So let's just say you're an agency and you have something like safety care, CPI, MANT, or those procedures, emergency crisis procedures, and you have somebody, and I know this never happens, but let's say somebody becomes unstable and there's something that is going on and they might try to jump into traffic or do something that puts them in a situation where obviously the risk of them jumping into traffic in front of, let's say, a diesel truck is going to be more risky than the restraint procedure, right? So as an agency, you go ahead and you use your crisis procedure and you put them into the restraint, backup comes, you get them to the house. Okay, that was one time. And then all of a sudden you see that this starts being a pattern. Well, ABI is saying that they want this written into the plan if it's consistently used, not just as a crisis measure. And once that becomes part of the plan, then there's other criteria that need to be involved too, such as what is the fading criteria of this? How are we going to fade this? What skills are we going to teach? What all goes through this when we are saying this becomes part of a plan, right? We're not saying, hey, we're going to restrain this person for the rest of their life and this works, so this is the way it goes. But when it does become part of the behavior plan, then we have a responsibility. How are we going to fade this restriction to get this person so they're not needing this restrictive procedure? And then I kind of want to make sure that everybody knows that I'm not pretending that there's no trauma involved in any of this when I have to do a physical hold on somebody, and that it's not always therapeutic, okay? And so we do need to take procedures to address that trauma and debriefing. And there might be some people with their trauma histories that certain holds and crisis interventions just might not be conducive to any kind of situation, except I wouldn't let somebody jump in front of a truck. So, all right. All right, so I thought it would be interesting if I shared other position statements and practicing guidelines pertaining to restraint and seclusion procedures. Not because I'm like so pro restraint and seclusion and saying I'm going to restrain everybody, actually just the opposite. But I just thought it would be interesting to see where do we all stand as different professionals and people who you might see on the interdisciplinary team. So the National Institute of Health says behavior reduction procedures should be selected for their rapid effectiveness, only if the urgent need and demand of the clinical situation requires such restrictive interventions, and only after appropriate review. These interventions should only be used in the context of a comprehensive and individualized behavior enhancement treatment package. All right, so again, it's saying it needs to be in the plan or some kind of a package, and it needs to be only as pretty much a last resort. The American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities states, the use of more intrusive interventions can be recommended when less intrusive interventions are insufficient. With regard to contingent procedures for reducing problem behavior, the guidelines indicated that when reinforcement-based interventions fail, the first line treatment is response interruption. This gives very clear. The second line treatment includes a response cost. And then non-exclusionary timeout, which simply means, for those of you who are not BCBAs, it just simply means that I'm going to remove attention from you, but you're still in the same room. I'm not like taking you out of the room to do a timeout. And then positive practice over correction, which means if you do something that, like, let's say you have socially inappropriate behavior and you provoke somebody and like call them a bad name, then I'm going to have you maybe 15 times say a nice comment to that person. So I'm going to have you practice the correct way over and over again. And then restitution over correction, exclusionary timeout, and then mechanical restraints. The American Psychological Association, Division 33, says highly restrictive procedures shall not be employed until there has been a sufficient determination that the use of less restrictive procedures was or would be ineffective, or harm would come to the client because of a gradual change in the client's particular problematic behavior. And then there's the Technical Assistance Center on Positive Behavioral Intervention Supports. You guys hear this as PBIS. Says seclusion and restraint should only be implemented A, safety measures, B, within comprehensive behavior support plan, C, by highly trained personnel, and D, with public, accurate, and continuous data related to 1, fidelity of the implementations. So basically we want to know, are the interventions being run the way that they were written to be run? Number 2, the impact on behavioral outcomes, both increasing and decreasing problem behaviors. So they want it to be very data driven. And let's see. All right, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychiatric Nurses Association, and the National Association of Psychiatric Health Systems jointly published this. Restraint and seclusion, when used properly, can be life-saving and injury-sparing interventions, which would be these are the people who work with the people who are at imminent risk of harming themselves and others, usually in a hospitalized setting. So it would kind of make sense that theirs is the most, yeah, this can be used because these people are usually in the middle of a crisis when they're seeing a psychiatric nurse association and people in that association and stuff. So I just kind of thought that was interesting. So nobody is saying that, and I think restraint and seclusion, basically restraint shouldn't be used, but they are definitely setting very clear and strict guidelines that must be followed. And this would be, I'd say, the granddaddy of all restrictions. So luckily, most of the restrictions that we deal with are not actually up to this restraint, right? I'd say probably most of us never really deal with restraint a whole bunch. So we'll go back to talking about regular restrictions as well. So I want to do some cautions for restrictions. So if I had to pick out a slide that was the money slide of this whole part of my presentation, I would say that this gives you the guidelines. So we have a responsibility to use the least restrictive methods possible, right? Everybody's guidelines said that. And to do this, the Department of Human Services states, it should be assured that any program causing a restriction of right has the following components in mind. So it's got to be temporary. So there has to be an effort to reduce reliance on restrictive measures throughout effective teaching methods. Again, this is going to go to your skill building. We're making that assumption that if I am reducing whatever behavior, problem behavior that I have, that they must somehow be developing these other skills that I have in the behavior plan for replacement skills, right? It's a big assumption because mostly in this system, we're kind of keeping track of challenging behavior, right? Maladaptive behavior, we're looking for that to go down. And then we just make the assumption that we're gaining, again, those skills that we're teaching. But we might not necessarily have data on that teaching methods and if they are, the skills truly are being learned. The other one is specified criteria. We should clearly define under exactly what circumstances it will be used. All right. So when is this restriction being used? Is it used all the time? Is it used some of the time? And do we need it in the community? Do we only need it in the home? Do we only need it at day program? When does this need to be used? And again, we're going to touch on it needs to be paired with learning training components that assist the person in eventual removal of the restriction. If we are not training and teaching a skill that is going to target this restriction, then we're really in an ethical, I feel, a situation because we're using the reliance on that restriction to teach, to force the behavior that we find appropriate, which, so how would we, if we have someone with a knife restriction, right? And maybe the knife restriction is not all the time with a knife, right? Maybe it's just when I am heated or in an escalation, I might get impulsive and grab a knife and threaten to stab my staff, right? And so we could see in that situation, we wouldn't want the person to have an access to the knife. So we might be working on some kind of skill to help them so that they don't escalate as high to where they're feeling like they have to grab a knife and make threats on people, right? So we call that coping skills. And then removal criteria. So are there clearly defined objectives when a person has met their goal? Again, if you are working on somebody's coping skills so that they don't escalate to the point where they're grabbing a knife, threatening to stab you, and this person maybe has gone 6 months and we're starting to teach, we taught staff to recognize when they say, I just need a break, and they go to the room and listen to music. And if they've been doing this reliably, is that a long enough time? I think it's going to depend on each individual, right? If you have somebody who is a kind of a go big, go home person, I call it, like, okay, most of the time I'm going to be good, but the one time that I'm not, it's going to be very, very dangerous. So you might kind of look at their history and kind of set that criteria, use it to explain and justify why you're setting that criteria. And then it needs to be reviewed regularly by the Human Rights Committee, and at least an annual review. And the Human Rights Committee role isn't just to identify the rights restrictions, but to ensure that required protections are in place to reduce the need to use these restrictive interventions. And it's going to ensure that the Behavior Management Committee does not unduly restrict a person's rights. So basically, when you guys are, all of you who serve on that Human Rights Committee and that Behavior Rights Committee, you guys should be looking to see are these components all taken care of in this behavior plan? Do I see, okay, we're targeting this behavior, and we have this restriction. Because of this behavior, right? Grabbing a knife, whatever. So now we have these sharps, but do we have that teaching component in it? Are we teaching that skill? And do we feel that that truly is the skill that needs to be taught to address the function or the deficit that has this person reaching for a knife, threatening to stab people? And then the Human Rights Committee takes action within the agency to stop the use of the restrictive measure until protections and safeguards are in place. And then the Behavior Management Committee just reviews the behavior plan. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
So Lisa, I think, some of the points that you brought up here, and these components to consider and the importance of all of them kind of playing together. And because, say if we impose a restriction on somebody so they don't have access to something, learning at that point stops. They're not learning from their consequences because there are no consequences. We've completely removed them from that person's environment. And so on the flip side, I think that's why those learning and training components are so important. But I think one of the things that I often see not included in behavior plans is data collection on those, alternative skills, those ones that we're trying to increase and not decrease. And if you're looking at, something being temporary with specified criteria and having a removal criteria, what would your removal criteria then be? Because if we have, data incidences at 0, but they're at 0 because they don't have any access, to that item, we have to base a criteria off of something. And I think that's why those skills to increase are so important. That should be data tracked as well, because then those can be folded in with the specified criteria and to see, what they are learning this alternative, functional skill. It is increasing, and we can use this to kind of determine what is our removal criteria.
That is a very good point, because when we do have that restriction in place, then oftentimes we will see the behavior go to 0, but for whatever reason, that restriction still stays in place. And that's because we're really kind of failing the person, because we are not taking that data on that behavior that we're trying to teach as a replacement, or we're teaching a replacement behavior that is not functionally related and has no effect on the challenging behavior. So we might have the wrong skill that we're testing, or that we're teaching. So that's a great point, Allison. Thank you. All right, so have you guys observed restrictions that did not follow the criteria that I just talked about, which is temporary? There's a fading plan, specified criteria, and it's reviewed by HRC and BMC. Yeah. I think, and that's, Allison and I aren't thinking, oh, we're human rights experts. Actually, quite the opposite. We also felt like this was an area that we could always gain more knowledge in. And what we see in the field is often these restrictions, and there's nothing that is no way to remove them, and no teaching involved is what is the really sad thing. Even if there's not data, there's still no teaching going on. So that's why we did this.
Okay, so like Lisa mentioned, in the considerations, things that need to occur before restrictions in place. So here we go. Before rights restrictions are imposed, skill building should be provided if possible. And so that is just flat out, that should happen. a lot of times when we see restrictions being imposed, there is a skill deficit going on, that somebody doesn't have the appropriate behavioral repertoire. So if we have phone restrictions, a lot of times it's a skill issue, that they don't know what is socially appropriate calling. They might be obsessively calling people. And so before removing that person's access to the telephone, skill building should be provided if possible. We know people have a right to the least restrictive environment. So the minute we impose a restriction, that is not the least restrictive environment anymore. And everybody has a right to that if possible. Before punishment procedures are utilized, we have to use reinforcement procedures first. So there needs to be, an effort in saying that we tried these reinforcement procedures. They did not work unless severity indicates immediate use. And that's kind of like the situation like Lisa was talking about, like if somebody's running out in traffic and jumping in front of trucks, obviously, we're not going to say, well, we need to use reinforcement procedures first. Like we're going to have to save this person's life and jump in and do a hold or something. When punishment procedures are utilized, procedures for alternative behavior should be included. And so again, that's what we talked about, that if we're using some type of punishment procedure, restrictive procedure, we have to also be teaching alternative behaviors. And ideally, we want these to be functionally equivalent, and that so these behaviors are going along with the same function. So if somebody has a dangerous behavior that might be, attention maintained, they're running around, grabbing knives or something like that, and it's indicated that this is attention maintained, we should be looking at teaching alternative behaviors for that person to functionally obtain attention from people. So how do you get attention from people, in a socially appropriate and safe way? All of these recommendations and guidelines are going to be from the Professional and Ethics Code for Behavior Analysis. So we did provide that citing on the bottom there. So I think, sometimes what happens is we miss the beginning and the middle, the little medium ground. And everybody's attention is alerted to the crisis. It's bad now, right? So everyone's, really worried. There's team meetings. The behavior is so severe, it's out of control. And I think what sometimes happens is we miss those behaviors before they start escalating up to that point. And because maybe they're not as severe, they're not as dangerous. But, we know that, people are going to engage in behaviors that work for them. And a lot of times the severity just kind of gets upped over time because of, naturally occurring consequences. So maybe they get ignored one time, or maybe it doesn't work, so they up their ante the next time. So I think, this is something that I remind myself constantly. And I think this is something for everybody to kind of remember, is that, we need to make sure that we're taking a step back and assessing a situation before running and jumping to restrictions. Make sure that you guys are ruling out any and all possible medical causes. Maybe have somebody new assess the situation. We need to feel like that we have done everything possible before we go to restrictions, because that changes a person's life. And, I try to think about, how would I feel if somebody didn't let me eat the foods that I wanted to eat, or somebody didn't let me watch the TV that I wanted to eat, or told me that I couldn't go out in the community, when I wanted to. And I know I would be an angry person. And that's kind of, what restrictions are, is we're changing people's lives, and we're limiting access to things. And most of the time, it's for safety reasons. Obviously, we've got to protect them and other people, but we're the people that are, supposed to be honoring these people and making sure that we're doing everything we can within our professional expertise to make sure that we have done everything we can before implementing restrictions. So try to build skills, make sure that we've tried other interventions, make sure that we've ruled out medical causes. And so that's what I just kind of want to make a plea to everybody, not to take these decisions lightly, And because I think sometimes, especially if we've been doing this for a long time, it kind of comes mundane in a way. And so we want to not let it be like that. Restrictions are a really big decision that we need to make sure that we're doing everything beforehand possible. So again, what do you guys think? Why do you think restrictions are imposed before skill building was attempted? That would be my answer. No training, there wasn't any training done, right? An emergency. Yeah, we've all seen those situations where it's just bad quick and you've got to make decisions. Yeah, I agree that these are all valid answers, you know, and it seems to be kind of like one of two things. Either it's this really dangerous situation that had a really quick onset and we've got to act quick and fast and we don't have time to skill build. We don't have time to do these things. We have to protect that person or protect the other person immediately. Or the other hand, it seems to be like that there might be some knowledge missing. There might be some pieces that were missed along the way. Maybe somebody, you know, didn't know that you have to follow these procedures first and foremost before going to restrictions. You know, we all know everybody gets in situations where, you know, huge staff turnover, you know, it's just a really difficult situation. And it's hard to get in and train all these people when you're not even keeping staff. So life can kind of get in the way. Inadequate staff training, right? Pressure from others. I think that's a really good comment too, that kind of going back to that, who implements these, you know, restrictions. And I think that that's something that is like a team, the team needs to make sure to have this discussion and kind of be open and honest with everybody. Like ultimately, you know, we know it kind of boils down to guardian in a way, but, you know, is everybody in agreement with it? Is there anybody that isn't in agreement with, and why? You know, is there something else that you feel like we should be doing?
I wanted to bring up, I wanted to bring up when you say like pressure from others, because I can just see this team of DSPs who are like fantastic that I work with. I have a client who doesn't let anything be on the surface and will, and so there was a question about a new environment this person's going into, and there's a lamp on the table, and the staff said, Lisa's going to want that lamp there so she has a chance to learn, you know, but they were all like, oh, and I said, it's just going to be one lamp and make sure you're okay with it breaking. So it was funny. So I, again, that pressure from others, but they also see the importance and the growth in this person being able to have those natural consequences and learning those skills. So I just picture all the cues getting all that feedback from their staff.
And that's the thing is, you know, natural consequences can be very scary. They can have legal implications. And they can also have, you know, really dangerous physical consequences too. I mean, you know, if I wanted to learn the natural consequence of what would happen if I ran in front of a truck, you know, I might not be able to tell you about those consequences afterwards. And so that's really, you know, this question of where do we let people learn on their own? When do we protect them? And then how do we let people learn in a way that's safe for themselves and others? And even if you're in a situation where you have to impose a restriction right away, that does not mean that you still can't honor those things to consider, you know, that yes, we have to put in a restriction right now to keep this person safe, keep other people safe, but it should still be considered temporary. There still should be skill building, you know, paired with that. And it still should be considered, you know, we should have to come up with the criteria, removal criteria. Now, that doesn't mean that, you know, that person's going to meet the removal criteria. There are situations where maybe somebody has to have a restriction for the remainder of their life if they never meet an appropriate removal criteria. But we have to make sure that we're setting those up in place so that we can potentially look at removing those restrictions if the person learns the appropriate skills. And just like we kind of talked about, why does this happen? Why do people do restrictions instead of building, skills? Well, skills take a long time to train, and it takes a lot of work. And, that can be really difficult for people who maybe are struggling with staffing issues, or, don't have the people on site they need to build these skills. But they are extremely important, because if we're building skills, we're going to be increasing that person's independence. We're going to be increasing their contact or reinforcers. And so ultimately, if we teach somebody to do something, we really don't have to do that for them anymore. We might have to monitor it, and ultimately we're teaching independence, which is great for the person, the client. It's also great for staff, because then that kind of alleviates some of the staff reliance in regards to whatever skill that might be. And also, we're increasing contact or reinforcers. And so if you have somebody who has community time, think of the possibilities that they have in the community. They can go shopping, they can meet friends, they can go out to eat. There's just so many different ways for them to contact reinforcers. But if you remove that and restrict that, you're really cutting off a lot for that person, and you're decreasing the reinforcers. And we all know what happens a lot of times whenever you start removing those types of things, is you might start seeing more maladaptive behaviors occur in different topographies. Skill building also increases access to new activities. So let's say, if we teach somebody how to appropriately use the phone or Zoom, now they might be able to talk with their family, talk with their friends, have video chats. These are things that they wouldn't have been able to do priorly if we didn't teach that skill. And ultimately, it reduces staff reliance. And so, when I do staff trainings, one of the things I focus on is, how do I get buy-in, from the people that I'm trying to convince that this is what they should do. A big buy-in for, direct care staff is time and, energy spent. And I know that kind of sounds bad to go that way, but if we have somebody doing their own skills and their own activities, that is going to reduce staff reliance. That is going to take, that much time or that much energy away, and that staff can allocate that somewhere else in their day. So obviously we want to be building instead of restricting. And you kind of just have like the flip here, the opposite going on. Restrictions reduce independence, obviously can decrease contact to reinforcers, decrease access to activities. And once you kind of jump on that restriction, it can also lead to further restrictions. You just kind of, you're not going to be able to have access to this anymore. Learning is out the window. And so then it might lead to further and further and further restrictions, to where you're just kind of like adding on. So we want to make sure that we're trying to build up these skills before we restrict. I know that there are situations where you have to impose a restriction immediately, but we also need to be building skills along with that and figuring out, what does this person need? What skills do they need? If it's, a eloping scenario, and it's possible to teach them, safe community skills, like how to walk on the sidewalks or how to look for cars. Those are all things, if you want to focus on a more preventative approach, if the person's eloping because, they get angry or upset, try to look at a more preventative approach of, how can we teach this person to come seek staff when they start to get upset, those kind of things. So there's lots of options too when you come into skill building, depending on the scenario. But we need to make sure that we're addressing the situation and identifying what is the skill deficit here, and how do we need to address it, and how do we need to build it. And I know that's kind of like a tall order to fill, especially depending on, where you're working. And I know that skill building can be difficult in a SILA environment, just because of the allocation of job distributions, that it's kind of hard to identify one person to do this job. but there are ways that you can build it into an everyday routine. And looking at how do you teach somebody to teach somebody, and we're going to kind of talk about that here in just a moment, whenever we get to behavioral skills training. So anyways, we're going to jump forward and look at how do we teach people new skills. Behavioral skills training, kind of like a brief overview here. It originated in the 1970s and was mostly used with cognitive behavioral therapy to teach client skills, and it was primarily focused on ADLs, those activities of daily living, like brushing teeth and changing clothes and washing hair, that kind of thing. It was often used as kind of a part of a treatment package. And so that's kind of its origins. But in 1972, Dollar, D-O-L-L-A-R, was one of the first articles showcasing behavioral skills training and was used to target the reduction of anxiety in teachers. Excuse me, guys. In 1979, there was also an article that produced an increase for interpersonal skills. So they were kind of looking at how to teach interpersonal skills. And they compared just like having a discussion with somebody, explaining those interpersonal skills, as opposed to BST. Obviously BST resulted in the most increases for interpersonal skills. So there's a lot of articles out there, but you're not going to really see anything before 1970. That's when kind of the first article came out and explaining behavioral skills therapy. So here we have, here's where behavioral skills kind of jumped into ABA. And this article is 1988, Milton Berger. If you guys are familiar with him, you'll know this is right up his alley and what he does. So he used behavioral skills training to basically teach a safety prevention manual for kids. So it was a red flag, green flag kind of thing, or safe, unsafe. And he uses to teach children personal safety skills in home. And so in the behavioral skills component, all children acquired the safety skills. So this is the article where behavioral skills training really came to applied behavior analysis. And when looking over time, behavioral skills training has really evolved, and it's continued to be used with direct client training, but it's also evolved to be used with staff and caregivers. And so it's kind of jumped into this like train the trainer kind of component. So BST is widely used. It's basically a way of teaching a skill to somebody else and making sure that that person is actually learning the skill. It can be used to teach children, adults, typically developing people with IDDD, and to teach a wide variety of skills. There are articles out there for social play skills, how to learn blackjack, fire safety skills. There's a lot of abduction prevention skills. I've seen a lot of articles with gun safety. Like I've read articles with BST on teaching females with Down syndrome, like safety and abduction skills in the community. Sexual abuse prevention, and then things like brushing your teeth and like those ADLs that we kind of talked about. So when it jumps to the evolved being used with staff and caregivers, so that's where we're kind of teaching somebody to either implement something or to teach something else. And that's when you guys, if you've ever heard that like train the trainer model, that's what this is based off of. They use BST to train the trainer. So going to staff and caregivers, they are using BST to teach people how to use the PEC system, so the picture exchange communication system, how to implement DTT, how to do like guided compliance procedures. So, how to do like hand over hand prompting, that kind of thing. Man training with caregivers. So just really when you jump into ABA, just a plethora of ABA skills are being used. So you're kind of getting meta right now. So we're using an ABA skill, BST, to teach people how to implement other ABA skills and protocols. And there's also a lot of things like with dentists working with children with autism, that kind of thing. But what I really want to get across the board today is two things. So one, this behavioral skills training is what you guys can use to teach people new skills, right? When we're looking at building skills for people to try to either avoid or to reduce restrictions, this would kind of be your recommended go-to, because you're actually going to be ensuring that somebody is going to be learning the skill. So going over the basics here, I'm not going to go like too in depth into any one of these, because we are going to provide you guys with a handout that has a brief discussion or a brief description of the BST and the basic steps. But looking at it, there's basically 4 components, and the handout has 6 steps. So the first one is the instructions step. So here you're basically giving somebody, you know, a written description of the skill being trained. So let's say that we're looking at, I kind of want to think of something like really simple here, not to go too in depth. But let's say if we're just teaching somebody how to make a phone call, just one simple phone call. You know, you're going to provide a rationale and description of the skill being trained. So here you would write out what it takes to make a phone call. And the rationale here would be, you know, that somebody is going to be able to make their own phone calls. They're going to be able to access, you know, reinforcers such as their family, that kind of thing. And I feel like whenever you're getting somebody and teaching them this, that the rationale is really important. You know, why is this important? Why are we doing this? And why are we spending the time and the energy to do this? And I think it really helps with buy-in too. And each component of the behavior chain must be detailed. I know we've got a lot of BCBAs out there, so you guys know what I mean, but basically every single step has to be out there. You know, if they have to enter a passcode on the phone, that kind of thing. If, you know, they have to click the green button first and then click in the number. So each of those steps really needs to be listed out in detail. And so that's why if you have a skill that's really layered and it's like got subset of skills, you're going to need to kind of pull those apart and teach those separately. So step 2 is the instructions, provide written description of the skill. So again, here, make sure instructions are not too complex or too simple. It should be presented by somebody who the learner reviews as reliable. We do know this is important whenever you guys are teaching something or giving information. It really helps if that person is viewed as being a reliable source and has good relationships with the people they're teaching. And then rehearsal should immediately follow. So here's kind of where I would say your general staff training kind of stops. So most of the time when you guys, you know, see staff trainings, somebody's talking to somebody, right? And I would say like this, you know, presentation is unfortunately, you know, a good example of that, because we're just talking at you guys, right? We're not asking you guys to perform a skill. We're not giving you feedback on it, that kind of thing. But we know that's not how people learn best. And so when you look at your general staff trainings, like in Scylla homes, everybody kind of groups into a large room. One person talks to everybody, you know, for maybe an hour or so, and then it's over. And, you know, I'm guilty of that because I've been there and I've done that. And sometimes, you know, it's hard to go beyond that, but that really is not how people learn best. And I'm going to kind of talk about the whole staff component in just a minute, but here's where it comes into. You have to have them rehearse that. They have to show you that they can do this skill, right? So basically what you're going to do is you're going to rehearse it. You're going to show them, what does this look like? What is it? What are we doing here? Then the people are actually going to model it for you. And then you're going to give them feedback on that until they can show you that they've learned that skill 100% or 90% competency. So if in the example of using a phone, right, you know, we would give somebody a list of instructions. It might look different for somebody depending on their functioning level. We would show them what it looks like. You know, here's your phone, you press this, you dial this number. And then now it's their turn to practice. They're gonna practice that. That's the modeling phase. Then we're gonna give them feedback until they have learned that skill. So in a nutshell, that's the BST component. And I really don't want to go into too much detail on this today, because I feel like that's going to be sidetracking the whole purpose of our presentation. But what I do want you guys to also think about from kind of like a staff training component, just a side note that I feel like people could benefit from this, is think about your behavior plans in a house and how many skills do you have in those behavior plans? And how many of the people in that house do you have that same skill in each of those behavior plans? So maybe thinking about what's a better way that you could teach those skills. And if you have 8 people in a house, and 6 out of those 8 people have redirection in their behavior plan as a skill that the staff are supposed to be utilizing with them, maybe pull that skill out and teach the staff redirection using behavioral skills training so that you can really teach the staff how to utilize redirection. Then also think of it from the client perspective too. What is a skill that everybody in that house could really benefit from learning? And then teach everybody in that house something. And if you look at it from, preventing restrictions, there's a lot of things that we know that we can teach, like social behaviors, phone behaviors, internet behaviors. Those are a lot of the things that we're really coming into contact to nowadays that come up as restrictions because people aren't utilizing those things appropriately. So you guys can use behavioral skills training to then teach these skills to kind of prevent and avoid restrictions. I know I got off on a little side tangent there, but I am a really firm advocate of BST. And I know initially it does take some work, but if you want to go in and teach a skill and make sure that person learns it, this is the way to go. And that you're not going to have to kind of keep doing those trainings over and over and over again, because you're going to see that it really exists. And again, we're going to be providing you guys with a handout on it. And I did provide some of the links for those articles in this presentation as well.
Okay, and so we're going to spend the rest of this time trying to talk about real situations, or most of it's a compilation of different people, but just different real things that we've seen in the community. So a lot of times when I've been an in-house behavior analyst and a consulting behavior analyst, and of course now with the support services team, and I get a chance to look at different policies in organizations, and almost all of them say we only use positive reinforcement. But so what happens when positive reinforcement does not work? And so this is a person who, we tried the positive reinforcement, we tried increasing their motivation. And so eventually we came down to where we've had to come and respond. I had to teach the individuals, the staff, to respond, to recognize the function of the challenging behavior. So this person will have the same topography. So the behavior looks alike. So whether or not I turn the light on with my hand, that's one topography, or if I turn the light on with my foot, that's another topography. But the function is the same, that it's turning the light on. So again, so I would teach the staff, a reaction strategy for an attention function is you suspect attention if someone is making eye contact with you, staring at you, smiling, or appearing to be entertained by staff's reaction. So again, you kind of see this because the person might hit you and they're looking right at you, smiling, they might be giggling, or the attention elopers are very easy to spot. They're walking away and they keep looking back. And if nobody comes to chase them, they turn around and come back in. And then so what we did is, again, we're training them to do this attention, and then we're doing a response, interruption, and redirection. This was probably if, again, if they're engaging in a challenging behavior such as hitting or something, we might block the hit, right? But we're not going to pay attention to the problem behavior. Like, I'm not going to say, oh my God, don't hit me. That's awful. That's not good. That's not nice. Right? you can see somebody who likes attention, they're going to be like, this person actually had a behavior chain set up. They would hit somebody and then go, nice hands. And so that was just the start of their behavior chain, and they were expecting that response. So we had to try something different. So again, this person would hit, and then we'd say, oh, do this, and we'd give them something else. Hey, like they named, had cards, and they would tact or label what was on that card. So, if they hit me, then I would put the card on the table and say, what's this? Again, and then they would say, that's corn. Then I'd say, yay. So I could give them the attention, meet that function for a positive behavior, which would be labeling or tacting that corn, which is the behavior that I redirected them to, instead of just removing all attention and never addressing that function, right? Of course, you gotta, but what would be ideal is the preventative strategy to provide enough attention so this person doesn't need to act out to get that attention, right? And so then the other thing was removal of attention. For those of you who are not BCBAs, this is actually a punishment strategy, not meaning punishment as in a reprimand. You don't do that, but punishment in that these are designed to reduce problem behaviors or challenging behaviors. And they are not based in positive reinforcement, right? We're not going to say, praise someone, hey, thank you for not hitting me today, right? Because somebody who's attention maintained is going to take that praise of you telling them what they didn't do, and they're going to hit you to get that attention. Thanks for the idea. So the other one is removal of attention. And this is what we call an inclusionary timeout. So remember, the one code said, exclusionary timeout, they don't use that, but then it kind of went in. Removal of attention simply looks like, let's just say this person spits at me because they're wanting something, but they spit at me and then they're laughing. And again, it's for attention. I might just kind of look down for the count of 5 or 10 seconds. And then I would wait for an appropriate response and then provide what they are asking for. And that's kind of what we did. So when we have these punishment interventions in behavior plans, we also need to make sure that we have gone through every positive reinforcement. We've tried to increase their motivating operations, their motivation for doing things. Make sure that you've done everything possible before you put these in. I do have somebody who does spit at staff, they used to spit at staff. And surprisingly, that is, I guess not surprisingly, that is a behavior that a lot of staff have issues with, and rightfully so. So anyway, so we got that, reduced that a little bit, but then it got to the point where they were like, hey, do we still have to track this spitting? Because it's not happening that much, it's really manageable. And to which my reply was, yes, we do, because it is tied to a punishment procedure in the behavior plan. And I need to know when I can reduce that and go to a more reinforcement-based intervention there. So just make sure that you guys as BCBAs are also educating the QIDPs or other people on the team who might not have that behavior background, what is in the plan. And I usually have a side note saying this is a punishment procedure or something. One thing that I make sure that everybody knows is that when they have retribution. So they break something, let's say push the lamp off the table or break something, that they have to then pay for the replacement. While I don't disagree for some people that that might be advantageous, I do try to explain to the people that this is not an intervention based in positive reinforcement. Just to kind of educate, as my ethical guidelines, I feel that it's up to me to kind of put that through. So I want to encourage you all to kind of do that as well. And as we all educate and train people on our perspective fields, I feel like the field gets better. So this next one of the restrictions that I see a lot is the phones. And I'm going to call this person a constant caller. So constant caller, I have seen restrictions where you have to tell staff if you want to make a phone call, and then it's up to the staff if they allow you to make a call or not. But there's no criteria on what the staff make that determination on. So this time I call it Johnny, because don't we always use Johnny? So I put in a proper phone etiquette program. So anytime Johnny wants to make a phone call, staff should ask, do you want to problem solve proper phone use before making your phone call to make sure you're on track with your goals? So again, this would be somebody who might be have more independent skills, and just kind of maybe get off track. And it's based in the skills system for emotional regulation with Julie Brown. If you've worked with the support services team, you've probably heard of it. And so if Johnny says yes, then I'm going to work through the following, either verbally or written. So this guideline is not necessarily for Johnny to fill out, but this is also to kind of train the steps to the staff. But if Johnny likes to see it, then this might be written out so that they can follow it as well. And if Johnny says no, I still allow him to make that phone call, right? And then I can provide feedback and or praise if he stayed on track. This is how I know if he's developing that skill, right? So as an ISC, you might have gotten called 20 times by somebody if you give the wrong person your phone number or a cue or whatever. And so then it's up for us as the recipient of maybe those constant calls to really set the boundaries and those consequences. So what's the consequence is I might pick up the phone and I might say, hey, Johnny, I'm going to have to block your number because you're calling me too many times, and we will set it up on every Tuesday at 3 o'clock. You can call me, right? And so I might try to set it up that he just calls me every Tuesday at 3, but if they don't listen to that, then I might take in other steps. I probably wouldn't block it. I would probably just, because I want to see if they're calling, but I would just not pick up the phone. And that would be the natural consequence. And then when Johnny calls me at the appropriate time, I'd pick up and then I discuss, I understand that you called me 50 times. And then I'd kind of discuss and have that work through that scenario with Johnny so that he sees I call 50 times, it still doesn't work. And not only that, it's kind of upsetting Lisa. She's saying that it's interfering with her other sessions. She's not liking getting that many calls. So Lisa is now nagging me. And then so this person maybe had a hard time getting their thoughts together, or always thought that they needed to call their cue, whomever. So then I'd say, okay, what kind of points do you need to express? Which is just talking about your needs, your wants, your likes, your dislikes. And then why is it important to express this? And then so we kind of write this out, or they'd kind of tell me what they want to express. And then I'd say things to consider is, are they going to the right person? Or are they in the right mind? I don't know if any of you've dealt with somebody who escalates and they always need to call someone, usually OIG. And are they in the right tone? Are they in the right place? And are they using the right words? Again, Was contact made? This is just to give me data if they are developing the skills. So they would say, yes, the person picked up the phone, or no, they did not. And did they leave a message? Yes or no. And if what if my plan, if I wasn't able to make, what is my plan if I wasn't able to contact the person? So let's say they didn't make it. So their plan might be, well, then I'm going to call them right back. Okay, what do you think is going to happen there? Well, they're not going to answer the phone. Okay, and just kind of have them work through that, and then they keep answering. But if we're a queue and we have a constant caller and this person's trying to call me and I'm ignoring it because they call me all the time and we have a time set up, and then they keep calling, and then on the 7th time I pick up the phone, what consequence am I teaching them? It's that, hey, the first 6 times it won't work, but if you call me the 7th time, I'm going to finally pick up, right? And I'm going to strengthen that behavior. So again, it's up to us to help deliver those healthy boundaries. And it's best practice to let the person know prior. So if I give my phone number out to my clients, I'm very clear to set those boundaries. I'm not always going to pick up your call. If you're calling me every day, I'm not going to pick it up. And then I kind of say, you can probably call me once a week, or only like if it's on a session day, you're going to be late, or, you're not going to be there, let me know. So I'm very clear setting those boundaries up. The next one is so instead of a restriction, they can still make the call, right? I'm just going to try to teach the skills that are appropriate to make a call for the person who calls all the time. Now, I usually get people saying, but what about the people who are inappropriate on their calls, or say things that are socially not acceptable? And that's the next slide. And so we have the inappropriate caller. So again, it's an etiquette program. I might have something, again, ask them if they want to problem solve, make sure if they want to, yes. If they don't, then I step back. Who do I need to express myself to? Again, if this person is saying, oh, I need to call Marquita, my queue, versus, oh, I need to call such and such school and ask about the children. If I was a sex offender, then I could pretty much tell which person is on track and which one probably is not on track. And then I'd say, okay, what things, so they say that they want to call the school, and I know this person might be a registered sex offender. And so I said, okay, what things do you need to discuss? And again, they might tell me what they need to discuss. And I said, okay, do you feel that this is an on-track call or an off-track call? Is this workable to your plan of staying safe in the community, or is this not workable? And then most of the time when you kind of break it down, as long as they're not highly escalated, they generally make the right decision. And then you can say, so what do you want to do? And then if they say, yeah, it's on track, I want to do it, just then problem solve, what could be the consequences for this? And talk about those consequences. And I'm sure it has something to do with the school might call the police and report it, right? Especially if my caller ID is on there. And so I'd kind of help them work with that. Is that a consequence you want? And again, I would still allow it to happen. I would try to be there to provide that feedback. And if the police came, I would talk about, because most of the time they're not going to make that call if it's in front of you. So again, okay, the police will come, and then what happens? yeah, you could lose your community setting, right? If you continue to do this and the school continues to complain, then you could get fined, or, you know, they'll usually come up with some kind of consequence and then decide that they don't want those consequences, right? And then hopefully at the same time, if this is truly a sex offender who's having those urges and acting on those urges, there's some type of counseling or something going on to where they're getting treatment so that they know acting on these unhelpful urges isn't the best to their recovery and staying in the community. All right. So this is a picture of a case that just reminds me when this happened to be a home environment transferring to a community environment. But we, as behavior analysts and Qs and ISCs, we're often involved when people are transferring towards a more restrictive environment. So let's say the state operated developmental centers started by nature because they're there to stabilize some people who are engaging in some very crisis, dangerous behaviors. But sometimes we see home environments that are more restrictive because what I like to call is survival parenting. And so this case is, you see there's nothing on the tabletops. We have the thermometer, the temperature gauge is locked up, the doors are all locked. There's gates in front of the doors. At nighttime, they're locked into their bedroom, but they did have the door so the top opens so that they can't get out. Closets locked, bed bolted to the wall. So like just so many restrictions. So sometimes when we come into these situations, we need to kind of account for restrictions that were in the environment that a person came from and work to fade those appropriately. What would you think? What do you think staff would say if I said, oh man, she had these 20 restrictions in her home and now we're just going to move her into the SILA, where of course none of this is happening, right? Not by any fire marshal or any SILA code. And I said, so we're going to just put this all in here and it's going to be great. And if we didn't account for that, I think your staff would get very burnt out. And so we would kind of try to recreate, not obviously we're not doing the locks in the door, we're not locking the door, but we might try like, okay, maybe this person needs a one-to-one staff, which is a different type of restriction, but so that this person can teach different skills, right? So now I'm going to have the ability to get up 90 times through the night, you know, when you put me to bed. So where before I wasn't. So now we have a one-to-one staff to kind of know, is this going to be an issue? Is this staff, you know, have to keep going in and say, oh, it's nighttime, lay in your bed, and then redirect them back to their bedroom to lay down. You know, so kind of look into that. Not all restrictions were put in to abuse or cause stress to the person, but severe restrictions do kind of provide an interesting challenge when we're coming from a more restrictive environment to the least restrictive environment. And it's important to do a complete assessment of the situation to create a workable plan. And so on that table, I might have, let's say, that lamp. Okay, so let's go back one to that safety corner. That safety corner. So this would be a situation that I got called from an agency, and they had an individual who was coming to their day program who knew that this person had already been kicked out of many other day programs, getting ready to transition into the adult waiver program. So I went to the school and I saw that they were sitting in a corner and it was kind of blocked in by two pieces of furniture, file cabinets, and then a big steel which was screwed into the wall so they couldn't knock it over. And then another big metal cabinet. And then they had the one-to-one aide would sit there and block them into this corner, which by the way had mats on the floor, mats on the walls and everything. And I sat there and I watched this and I thought, oh, this is the person I need to get into day program. No problem. So, you know, when this person also came out of the corner, they went into a wheelchair, not because they needed the wheelchair. It was strictly a restriction so that they would be able to control their behavior. Again, the staff at the school was awesome. They weren't saying we're doing this to make this person's life miserable. I think this was, we don't know what else to do, and this person is injuring every other student in the class. So this is what we came up with. And for a while it was working. So I got the luxury of working with the student prior to the transition and coming up with strategies. How do we reduce these and fade these restrictions? And that was by teaching skills. So when not in the school safety corner, where was this person? So the first thing is they came to the day program and I'm like, okay, let's see if these restrictions are still needed, right? So we go into a classroom and take them out of their wheelchair, and the person lays on the floor, spins in a circle and starts kicking at people, and then grabbing the activity, which was music that was playing, and starts trying to grab the music player and throwing it. So now I know, okay, this is why these restrictions are in place. So the first thing that I wanted to teach is acceptance of sitting in a chair. And so how do I do that? And so I had to write this whole fading criteria. The first thing that we're going to get rid of is the wheelchair, right? And so we did all sessions in a room where it was me, this person, and then staff that I was training, and the school staff who were bringing her to this environment. And this person sits in a chair, doesn't even use her wheelchair today. So it was very successful. The agency was very creative and really kind of gave a lot of leeway and made things happen based on this fading criteria and different environments that we needed to create a more flourishing life for this individual. And I just can't say, when you are, the main focus is developing skills, which we all know in this field is generally reducing skills. But here we all knew, and we were taking data. The first time they sat in a chair was 2 seconds. And we were all cheering, because to get to that point, it took several weeks. And by the end of school, they took these, the aide had taken what I was teaching, and this person was sitting in the classroom with the rest of the students at the desk. So again, just think what would have happened if they had all this ability earlier on in this person's life, and think how much different this person's life could have been. I will tell you that there was some trauma associated with this. I will tell you how not to get a person to sit in a chair for an increased amount of time is not to tie them into the chair for an increased amount of time. This person had total choice to accept or decline sitting in a chair. And I would just manipulate the amount and the magnitude of the attention and the preferred activities that this person got in each scenario. And so that was just really great to see. And it also got us buy-in by the agency, and this has been a successful transfer. And I think when we're thinking about our SODCs, which I see a lot of transfers come from our SODCs, you know, I don't want you guys to ignore any kind of restrictions in there, but sometimes we have restrictions just because of the environment that they come from, right? But I want you to kind of take that into consideration, figure out what restrictions are essential for maintaining this person's stability, and then do what you can to try to continue the teaching of the skills, because when our people are in the SODCs, they can only learn so much in that environment due to the nature of the restriction. So there is some skill development that they need to develop, and they need to be out in this community to be able to learn and have those consequences that naturally occur. But you can kind of set it up with recognizing the restrictiveness of the environment that they're coming from, and then trying to get your fading criteria, as well as think about the skills that you are teaching and increasing, so that we don't go back to that crisis situation that got them in the SODC. Alice.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to, had a little bit of technical difficulties there. My mouse decided to have a little bit of a mind of its own. So, we talked a lot about, things that should be done before restrictions, and skill building is, definitely a huge focus on that. And I think, talked about some different scenarios. Lisa's given some good examples of some things she's come in contact. And I think one of the things to focus on is that gray area that I kind of brought up in the beginning, and that no decision is going to be the same for each person. And so, one of the things that, I kind of wanted to bring up, and I've had an experience with this, and that somebody, a client has a motorized wheelchair, but then they start using that motorized wheelchair to hurt people. And elope down a street in the middle of the street towards traffic. And so now the device that they use for mobility and access to, the community, to people, to everything, it's their legs basically, has now become something that is potentially dangerous. And so then you have a rights, a restriction discussion about, should this person have access to their motorized wheelchair? And that's a really big discussion, and that's a really big question. And I think, in this type of situation, if the team decided to take access from the wheelchair, then you would really need to make sure to follow those guidelines of, when does this person get access back to it, how long, that kind of thing, and make sure that every single potential alternative has been exhausted. It's, it can be really difficult to make these decisions, because these decisions really greatly affect a person's mobility, the access to events, etc. And so when we're looking at making restrictions, I think sometimes people may not see the impact that they're having on a person's life. And even if it's just, something, what they would consider little, access to this, or, access to that kind of thing, that could be a really huge deal in that person's life, and I want to make sure that every single restriction is kind of viewed with that importance in that situation, and that there's no clear-cut answer to what is right and what is necessarily wrong. But I think the important thing is that everybody that's supporting that person, on that person's interdisciplinary team, is doing their due diligence to make sure that every single thing is being done for them. So a situation also is thinking about, what is a restriction, or is it, potentially a preference? I mean, I had a situation where somebody who was diagnosed with autism would, when they would come to the dinner table with their other housemates, they would start being extremely disruptive. They would throw plates and slam the table and start screaming, would throw the other people's food everywhere. And so, I mean, this was really disruptive for, everybody. I think it was distressing for my client. It was distressing for the people that were sitting at the table. And so the decision was made that, that he doesn't sit with the rest of the people and eat dinner. So this was just like a decision that was made. There was no formal plan or discussion in place. This wasn't implemented in any, you know, documents or anything. And I think that that person didn't really view it as being a restriction, but I think, you know, in all reality, it kind of is. I think you know, it is, because you're telling this person that you can't eat meals with the rest of your household. You can't be around your other house members in a social situation. And so, you know, really, we are kind of looking at a restriction there. But the other thing to kind of think of is that how that situation is being perceived differently from everybody involved. So the peers there, obviously, they don't want their food being thrown everywhere. They don't want to be, you know, chased around the table and screamed at. And so not the greatest for them. The client who was actually, you know, engaging in the disruptive behavior, ultimately, he was really stressed out by social situations. And so like the more people in proximity to him and closer proximity to him, the more stressful it was for him. And, you know, the function wasn't like, you know, escape or attention or tangible or anything like that. It seemed to be just associated with his autism, and that it was a stressful situation for him and he did not like it. So something that actually ultimately was a restriction kind of turned out to be just a preference for him, and that he actually enjoyed, you know, beginning to sit by himself. And so I think this is kind of a good example to bring up, and that it's not clear cut. It is a super gray area. And you have something that, depending on the person, was not viewed as a restriction, was viewed as a restriction, was technically a restriction for the person, but probably would have been their ultimate preference if they had, you know, chosen, you know, given on history and reports. And then also how it impacted different people in the different situations. So, you know, the different housemates involved, that kind of thing. So again, every situation is really different. It needs to be looked at from all those angles just to kind of figure out what exactly is going on in this scenario and who all does it impact. So I kind of want to loop back around to our initial kind of thought and just ask you guys, you know, what do you think now? The first thought that comes to your guys' mind, is it different? Is it the same? What's the word? Just go ahead and throw it in. So, you know, Lisa and I really wanted to kind of make this as an open discussion. And, you know, obviously we wanted to kind of provide you with that information from, you know, different point of views from different disciplinary backgrounds of what restrictions, you know, are, how they should be implemented. You know, what does the ABA professional and ethical code guidelines say should be done beforehand, afterwards, during. But I think for me, you know, that it doesn't have to be a one and done thing. It doesn't have to be a clear cut, this is restricted. Try to figure out what are the different ways that you can do this. I mean, you know, thinking of like a phone restriction, you know, what exactly is the problem going on? Are they getting on the internet, on their phone? You know, maybe you can get one of those jitterbug phones, you know, where you can only call numbers while you're teaching some internet safety skills. And so there are ways that you don't have to completely restrict the scenario, and then you can come up with some alternatives while you're working on skill building and figuring out, can we teach this person some safe replacement behaviors, you know, that are functionally based, so that we can give them access back to that you know, item or community access or whatever it is in the moment. You know, this is going to let you guys make the best possible decisions and help support the, you know, the people that we are supporting in the best way that you can. I really want to make sure that you guys realize the impact that you have on everybody's lives and how important it is that we're making the best decisions for them. I think I want to look at some of these words, nuanced, right? I think that's a great description, honestly. needed. I agree with that too. You know, there's a lot of situations where it is necessary, not only for their person, you know, the safety of them, but other people as well. We have to protect other people. Safety, big word, right? Individualized, I think that's a great word to use, and that it should be individualized. It shouldn't be like, well, I did a phone restriction with my other client, so that's what, you know, we're going to do the exact same thing right now. Lisa, you asked anything you
I
want?
get, yeah. So I noticed that the safety word is big, and I like that, because I have certainly seen some restrictions in place because it's just annoying. You know, this person's only allowed to make one call a day, and we're going to limit them at one call a day. And I'm like, what service does that, what does that get to? That's not teaching anything except for I get one call every 24 hours, right? So, but you can see, you know, when we are looking at restrictions, you know, let's really kind of hold each other accountable and be like, okay, is this something that we can teach and allow them to experience these natural consequences? What will those be? How can we help assist and train and get those natural consequences? Or is this a safety issue and the natural consequences to get hit by an 18-wheeler? Okay, so yeah, let's do that restriction, right? And let's teach this skill while we have that restriction in place. So I like that. Projection training, I think, you know, it is a all, you know, all hands on deck kind of thing. The staff need to be taught how to train and teach these skills to the individual, which takes another training, right? It can't be just SST coming in one day a week, one time a week and teaching these skills. Your staff have to recognize these skills and be able to reinforce and strengthen these skills within the person, right? So yeah,
I really agree with that, Lisa. And I think that's something that really is lacking a lot of times, is those replacement skills. And the focus is just on reduction of maladaptive behaviors, and that's it. And you know, we know that that's really not going to work. That those maladaptive behaviors are occurring for a reason. And we need to, you know, functionally fulfill that in an appropriate way and teach those alternative skills by increasing, you know, appropriate replacement behaviors. And I feel like that really needs to be beefed up in the behavior plan, and the focus of, you know, serving the person. And, you know, if we continue to just decrease behaviors, restrict, what are you going to end up with? I mean, that's, you know, that's ultimately a really bad road to go down. And we're there to support the person, you know, help them kind of grow their independence and see, you know, what are they capable of? And once you start teaching skills, I think that's really going to give you a great idea of what is possible. Not everybody's going to be able to learn all of these skills to be able to do all these things, but it's going to give you a really good idea of what is feasible. And then I think that's going to also kind of help guide you in as you go along of what does this person need to be supported? You know, what skills do we need to give them? What's kind of like the cap of what they can learn in that area. And so then that's really going to guide you as an interdisciplinary team to serve that person effectively.
And I feel while this session was really geared towards BCBAs, this is the same training. We've done it now 4 times. And so I want to kind of, I guess, warn you BCBAs out there that we have been educating the rest of the field to kind of hold us accountable, because a lot of times, you know, and what popped up on that word board was restrictions are easiest. Yeah, it's easiest, but it's not effective and it's not the kindest, and it really doesn't help a person flourish and truly make a real behavior change. So we all need to kind of take responsibility when these restrictions come into place and really kind of do a double take and think, is there something else don't be afraid to ask these questions. As a behavior analyst who puts things in, I love it when a team questions me and asks things. And I think it ultimately leads to better service for the people who are in the system that we work for. So I personally think it's kind of a duty to all of us to give these people the best opportunity to learn on natural consequences and to really rethink these restrictions and see if there's other ways. And if we tried every other strategy before we put one into place, again, as long as there's not an urgent safety situation going on. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's everything that we really need to be come in mind, and be mindful when we're practicing and helping teach everybody our profession, so that everybody understands what we're there for and what we're trying to do, and make sure that we're not losing sight of all the things that we're supposed to be doing, along with keeping people safe, is that other component of skill building and replacement behaviors and functionally appropriate behaviors. I think today was, a really great discussion, and I do enjoy everybody's feedback through the poll everywhere activity. So I want to thank everybody for that. And it looks like we're just going to be wrapping up now because we are coming to an end of our time together. Jenny, is there anything that you needed to let everybody know before we're going to wrap it up for the day?
Hi, everyone. Just wanted to thank everybody. Oh, here we go, video. Just wanted to thank everybody for attending. I will be sending out an evaluation form, so just check your emails for that, and then just go ahead and then send that back to me, and then I'll go ahead and then send out the certificates for your CEs. And then I went ahead and then put my email in the chat box as well for everybody to have. All right.
Thank you, Jenny. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate your
Thanks,
responses,
guys.
and we had a great time together today. Bye.